Assalamu alaikum. I hope you can hear. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we've come to the more interesting part of the course, I hope, for most of you, which is the Tasawwuf, right, or Sufism or Islamic spirituality, which when we started from Hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, Ihsan, we defined Ihsan as that part of our deen, of Islam, that sort of focuses on excellence, right? And focuses on how to reach the apex of Iman and Islam. So Tasawwuf, where does this word come from? This word comes from Sufism, right? The root letters again are same. Sufism is the English version of it, of Tasawwuf, right? It comes from Suf. Tasawwuf, it comes from Suf. So the root letters are Swad, Waw, and Fa, which means wool. And apparently this name rose about because Sufism essentially arose when Muslims focused on those parts of the teachings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that were to do with the inner self, right? So they focused a lot on zuhud, for example. What is zuhud? Zuhud is asceticism, in other words, not being this worldly, being otherworldly, right? So focusing more on the soul or the spirituality, more on the other world as compared to the material world that is in front of us. So this concept is not alien to Islam, right? It is part and parcel of the deen. Where are the ideas coming from? These ideas are coming from the Quran and the Sunnah, right? But Sufism or Tasawwuf, these two terms were not used at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So people sort of started saying this term to people, to a group of people who were more inclined, you can say, towards focusing on the science of the heart and the soul, the science of purification of the heart, right? So Abu Hassan al-Nuri, who's a very famous, one of the masters of Sufism, said about Sufism that Sufism is neither regulations nor sciences, rather it is character traits. So the way he defined it is that it is simply character traits, right? So whatever, the characters that we learn from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or the characters that are mentioned in the Quran, Sufism focuses on them, right? So other Sufis and other scholars have explained it as the science of, the heart and the soul, and how to develop your character, right? So again, the sabab has to do with ikhlas, which is what? Sincerity, right? I.e. doing everything for the sake of Allah. Because, the heart, when we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the qalb. In the Arabic language, it's called qalb, and it is the center of your soul, right? That is the understanding. Now, the soul or the heart thrive when God is remembered, right? So when the Creator is remembered, you remember your relation with the Creator, and then that sort of reminds you of how your soul came into being, right? So it connects you with your true essence, because this body will end, right? So at one point in time, our bodies are going to stop working. The soul is what will live on. The soul is the eternal part of us, right? And it is the most important part of us. So that is the understanding. So ikhlas, then sincerity, would mean working and realizing on that our real selves is actually that soul, that intangible being inside of us. Yaqeen is certainty. So naturally, tasawwuf aims to get rid of doubt and move towards certainty, right? Adorning the heart with good attributes, ridding the heart of bad attributes, and it's basically the science of the soundness of the heart. This is again defined by Imam Ghazali, and I'm going to introduce him to you a little bit more today, as zawq or taste, right? So you've done already a reading by Imam Ghazali, the true nature of prophecy, the true nature of prophethood, right? And he mentions this is zawq or taste. So what does that mean? It means experiencing the divine, experiencing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your lives, right? As opposed to just believing in him in a formal way, right? So actually feeling that he's present. Now, let's look at a hadith that mentions the heart or the qalb, right? So there is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Muslim. Beware, in the body there is a piece of flesh. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. And if it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Hearken or listen or know that it is the heart, right? Know that that is the heart, which is in Arabic used, the word used is qalb. So again, now it's talking about the body, but the understanding is that if you work on your spiritual selves, you're also enhancing your physical selves as well, right? So sometimes there is this understanding that disease also happens, right, when there is a disbalance in your physical body, right? So the understanding is that there is also spiritual disease, and we'll come to that later. So purification of the heart works to cure that disease of the heart. Okay? And you can also see the inner and the outer relationship here. So if you're talking about the heart, right? The Prophet ﷺ could have said the whole soul is corrupt, right? But then he said the whole body is corrupt. So it's sort of like penetrating your, the state of our heart or the soul penetrates into the whole body, sort of, right? It does affect in a certain way, but not always. It is not always manifest. Um, it does not always manifest, right, in this manner, but this is also something to think about. In the Quran, in Surah Shu'ara, ayah number 89, Allah says, except one, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Yani on that day, on the day of judgment, nothing is going to benefit a person, right? Not, not children, not any relation, not wealth, nothing, no power that we have in this world. It's not going to help on that day, except that person who comes to Allah with a sound heart. In Surah Hadid in the Quran, there's this ayah, has the time not come for those who have believed that their hearts should become humbly submissive at the remembrance of Allah? So one thing here is we're talking about the hearts um, and submissiveness of the heart itself, right? So one thing is to being submissive. Islam means submissing, um, peace through submission, right? To submitting to Allah. So that naturally has the connotation of submitting in our actions, having certain principles that guide our lives. So here it's particularly the hearts that are mentioned, the hearts that become humbly submissive at the remembrance of Allah. The second thing is the dhikr of Allah, which is the remembrance. So the understanding is that remembrance is a part of, is what is done by the soul, right? So we remember Allah with our hearts that are the center of our souls, and what has come down to of truth. And let them not be like those who were given the scripture before, and a long period passed over them, so their hearts hardened, and many of them are defiantly disobedient. So there's this understanding of the heart becoming hardened, right? When it is not softened by the remembrance of Allah, it becomes hard. Now, this ayah, Ayatul Bir, known as the ayah, the verse of righteousness. So if you look at this, think about all the things that are mentioned that are part of righteousness, that define piety or that define good action, right? It is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards east or west, but it is righteousness to believe in Allah, the last day, the angels, the book, the messenger. So first, Iman, again, right? And to spend of your substance out of love for Him. So the first thing is that what is bir, what is righteousness? It is Iman itself, to believe in all the articles of faith. And secondly, spending of your substance, i.e., spending um, financially, right? What you have. And for whom? For your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, i.e., the traveler, or those who ask for the ransom of slaves, right? And then what is mentioned is apart, any separately financial spending is mentioned, and then you again have particularly Islam, to be steadfast in prayer, right? And practice regular charity, to fulfill the contracts which you have made, right? To be sincere and truthful in the promises you have made, and to be firm and patient. So you see this, to be firm and patient in pain, affliction, and adversity, and throughout all periods of panic. Such are the people of truth, the God fearing. Again, God fearing or God conscious, the word uses muttaqun, right? Those, the people of taqwa, that those who are conscious of God. So patience is again an attribute which is highly highly rewarded, right, in all senses of the word, in this world and the next as well. And patience would again be, you know, how to get patience, right? Emotionally, and to understand what are the things, what are the understandings of the world, of reality, that that make you reach that state of patience, right, and acceptance and acknowledgement of the way that certain things are. Also, there is, because wisdom is a part, it's like the lost treasure of the believer, right? Hikmah jo hai wo, that is one of the goals of prophethood. So there are four goals of prophethood, and one of them is hikmah. Okay, so in Surah Baqarah, there is an ayah in which Prophet Ibrahim prays to Allah to grant him, a successor, a prophet, who will bring four things. So I won't go into that right now, but that is something we will discuss tomorrow, inshallah. So the four goals of prophethood. Okay, and one of them is actually purification, tazkiyah. Right. So where were we? Right. So interestingly, one of the goals of prophethood was purification of souls, right? So tazkiyah, and the second one, matlab, from amongst those four, there was another one, that is hikmah, and to teach them wisdom. That is actually one of the goals of prophethood. So wisdom dictates that a person understands the things that they cannot change, and also understand what they can change. So they understand their circle of influence. For those of you who've read Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, this is a very good example. कि circle of influence increase तब होता है जब हम अपने ऊपर काम करते हैं. When we're working on ourselves, on our inner selves, our circle of influence increases. Otherwise, our circle of concern may be large. We might be concerned about a lot of things, but we don't have power over any of them. So it basically makes us very powerless, right? So to increase our circle of influence, we have to work on ourselves. So again, patience, right? Patience is defined as three things. In adversity, even if I've mentioned this before, it's very, very important. कि एक चीज़ है पेशेंस इन एडवर्सिटी इन डिफिकल्ट टाइम्स. सेकेंड थिंग सब्र जो डिफाइन किया जाता है वो ये है कि अच्छे अमाल पे सब्र करना, i.e. doing having persistence over good actions. And then the third thing is having persistence in staying away from those things that are not allowed, right? Staying away from sin. So these three things make up patience. Here, particularly, adversity is mentioned. In pain, in adversity, throughout all periods of panic, such are the people who are God conscious, right? Because again, patience, sabr is, realizing that this is a temporary time, right? Temporary world. So again, zuhud, asceticism also comes from this idea, right? Now, let me introduce you to Imam al-Ghazali, who you've already read as the author of the person who wrote True Nature of Prophecy. Your reading on page 286, right? Deliverance from error is actually the discussion of the ways of the Sufis, which is right before True Nature of Prophecy. And in the book that he has written, Munqidh Milat Dalala, the deliverer from error, or some people translate it as deliverance, right, as a noun. Here it's translated as deliverer, because Munqidh is actually ism fa'il, the person, right, or the thing that delivers you. So Munqidh is the deliverer from error. Okay, so who was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali? He was born in 1058 in Tus, Iran. And he had an uncle, right, who was a scholar. And apparently that is where his interest in the Islamic sciences developed, right? So his family was not really a family of scholars, but there is um, some proof that he had an uncle, right? So you can call him Senior al-Ghazali. So Imam al-Ghazali, whose teacher was al-Juwayni, He started teaching in Baghdad in the Nizamiya College under Nizam al-Mulk's, he was Nizam al-Mulk was the Seljuk Sultan at that time, so he was really impressed by Ghazali and his scholarship. Right, he was not just a faqih, a person who knows fiqh. He was a theologian, and later on became one of the Sufi giants, right, and one of the revivers of the Deen of Islam, right. There is this saying that in every century there comes a reviver, because Islam is till the end of times. Every century sees a reviver, and a lot of people view Ghazali as that person. So in 1095, around 1095, what happened was that he was teaching at a head position. He was one of the head professors at Nizamiya College, right. And he stopped. I've already mentioned this in a previous class. He sort of stopped teaching because he said he went through a period of doubt, right. He was already studying philosophers, and he wrote about philosophers in his Maqasid al-Falasifiya, right. Sorry, Falasifa. um, Maqasid means again purpose, right, or the goals of philosophers. Later, he wrote the Hafut al-Falasifa, which is the incoherence of the falasifa, or the incoherence of the philosophers, right? And now, a lot of people, particularly a professor in Yale University, he mentions that this book is not, only pertaining to the philosophers generally, but he's particularly criticizing Avicenna, Ibn Sina's philosophy, right? So certain views that Ibn Sina holds, Ghazali goes against them and writes about them in detail in Tahafut al-Falasifa. Ihya Ulumuddin, this is the second one here, is the revival of the religious sciences. And this, it's a volume, right, of around 40 books. And he writes about the Islamic sciences, but also what inner dimensions they have, all of them. So, for example, fasting, he writes about that, and what are the inner dimensions of fasting. So one example is that fasting is not just, abstaining from food, but it's also abstaining from foul speech, right, or lying, or arguing with someone. So it's abstaining from all bad things. It's also like an inner purification. Inner purification. It's meant to be an inner purification, right? So it's only that when you are, staying away from your material benefits, you sort of, focus more towards your soul, right? Instead of feeding your body, you want to feed your soul. Another understanding of, Sufism and Tasawwuf is, scholars mention how the Prophet ﷺ, before he attained prophethood in the cave of Hira, right, Ghar Hira, he went there for meditation. Now, this was before he became a prophet, and this was a time in which he started having dreams, and then sort of isolation, or staying away from society, started to become beloved to him, right. So before that, it wasn't at all like that. But then he started going to the cave Hira, and he used to stay there for days on end. So that particular time refers to a period of introspection, a period of meditation, right? Thinking about reality, about God, about who created us, where do we come from. That is one understanding of Sufism, and we're going to open that up later and look at the pros and the cons, and all of the silsilas of the sabab that have come out of this understanding. The Alchemy of Happiness, Kimiyai Sa'adat, is another work of Al-Ghazali. And I wrote an excerpt, I typed up the excerpt here from it. In truth, man in this world is extremely weak and contemptible. It is only the next, i.e. world, that he will be of any value, if by means of the alchemy of happiness, he rises from the rank of beasts to that of angels. Alchemy, what does that mean? It means turning a stone or something useless into gold, right? To something valuable. So the understanding is to turn our weak, powerless selves into something of value. This is how he explains it, right? Otherwise, his condition will be worse than the brutes which perish and turn to dust. It is necessary for him that while he is conscious of his superiority as the apex of created things, right? So, Ashraf al-Makhluqat, right? To learn to know also his helplessness, right? To know your strengths and your weaknesses, as I always say, as that too is one of the keys to the knowledge of God. So when you understand your helplessness, so for example, in today's corona situation, the global emergency, one understands Allah, right? People who don't believe in God, they are, saving themselves from an organism which they cannot see, which only they only have signs of it. They can only test it, right? They can only see the signs or the effects of it, but they cannot really see it, right? So that argument falls down on its face when somebody says that you show me God and then I will worship him, right? So now in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this word tasawwuf of tazkiyah was not used, right? Nevertheless, we do know, for example, in one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu should lead prayer. So he mentioned that he was unwell when he was near his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that Abu Bakr should lead me, and Abu Bakr's daughter, Hazrat Aisha, mentioned, but then he won't stop crying because he will cry so much in salah. How is he going to lead? That sort of does you know hint at the fact that he had a very soft heart. So he was prone to shedding tears when he was reciting the Quran. And so a lot of, you know, this knowledge of the inner science comes from Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu as well as Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, both of them, right? So Sufi science, the science of Sufism stems from both these great Sahabi. So let me give you an example of what this actually means, right? We talked about habit, how to change habit. And Aristotle mentioned we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit, right? So ihsan, in a way, you can look at it, it is actually, you have to make it a habit, right? Ihsan, doing everything in an excellent way. So it's changing for the better. It's also any motivation, your intention, your desire, as well as your action, your practice, right? Your skills and knowledge sort of help that. So intentions are a big part of our deen, as I've mentioned before. Intentions and actions both, right? Sufi al-Junaid, i.e. Junaid al-Baghdadi, explained a human being is not blamed for what is in their nature. They are only blamed if they act on what is in their nature. What he means, it doesn't mean कि आप अपने inner self को change ना करें, right? Because Sufism, Tasawwuf does aim at doing that. So if something is wrong, if an action is wrong, तो उसकी feeling हटाना भी हमारे ऊपर बनता है. So for example, not hating anyone, right? Not having unlawful anger in our hearts, not having pride in our hearts. But what he's saying essentially here is that sometimes, our nature is that we're impatient, for example, right? But a person needs to act on try again and again and make effort on being patient. So it's actually their act which will be judged in the end as well. But Allah is so merciful that he actually mentions both intentions and actions in this hadith, for example, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said that, verily Allah has recorded good and evil deeds and he made them clear. Whoever intends to perform a good deed but does not do it, Allah will record it as a complete good deed, even if he's just intending and doesn't do it. If he does it, right, then Allah will record it as 10 good deeds, up to 700 times as much or even more. So one good deed can actually gain you, 700 times reward. If you intend to do an evil deed, but we don't do it, then actually Allah will record it for him as one complete good deed, because intention thi any nature us taraf kar raha tha mile, right? But then that person did not act on it, so that will be recorded as a good deed. And if he does it, then Allah will record for him just a single evil deed. That's it, right? So look at the comparison. So this is the mercy of Allah, right? That he gives so much. Now I want you to listen to this. I will put it on so you guys can listen to this. So the idea is that naturally Islam and Iman go hand in hand together, right? So it cannot be, whenever the Tasawwuf or Sufism is practiced without the Sharia, there are issues, right? A person will go astray.
And then he says,
right?
so there's no tasawwuf without fiqh, because the sidq al-tawajjuh is what the tasawwuf is, but it has to be in accord with what's pleasing. And then he says, because you can only know the decrees or the rulings of God, the exoteric ones, the external ones, only by that, by fiqh. It's fiqh that teaches you how to bathe, how to pray, the ritual, formal components, because tasawwuf is dealing with the inner state during those rituals. But you have to do it through the form of the ritual. But if you don't have the form, then the inner state is not going to be able to function as it should. And so he says, وَلَا فِقْهَ إِلَّا بِالتَّصَوُّفِ, and you can't have fiqh, the formal, without the internal. So you can't have the internal without the external. You can't have the esoteric without the exoteric. You can't have the fruit without the hull or the exterior that protects the fruit. Right? You can't benefit from a fruit if it has no exterior protection. So, and then he says, and وَلَهُمَا إِلَّا بِإِيمَانٍ, you can't have either of them without Iman. So one of them without the other two, it's not. لا يصح واحد منهما. One without the other is impossible. You can't have it. فلازم الجميع لتلازمها في الحكم. So you have to have both because of the interdependency of one upon the other in the hukm, in this, the outward and the inward. Like the interdependence of spirits with bodies. So he's giving you an analogy now. This is a type of reasoning. He's showing you an analogy that enables you to understand this. So he says, وَلَا وُجُودَ لَهَا إِلَّا فِيهَا. You can't have the spirit except in a body. You can't have the spirit except in the body. كَمَا لَا حَيَاةَ لَهَا إِلَّا بِهَا. And in the same way, you cannot have a body that has life without the spirit. So he's saying the fiqh is the body, the sidq al-tawajjuh is the spirit. Ibn Ata'illah in the Hikam, he says that amalu, the deeds are bodies. And he said that the spirit, the arwah, are the ikhlas, is the sincerity in the body. So your deeds are like bodies, they're forms, but those forms are animated by your sincerity. And then he says, and this is why Imam Malik said, and this is a famous statement attributed to Imam Malik that's mentioned in many books, whoever does tasawwuf, and this was a word we know that was used during his time already, it's very early, it's used very early, and Imam Malik was aware of the Sufis, and obviously as somebody with sidq al-tawajjuh, he himself has a big portion of this science, even though he didn't teach it formally in the way that it was formalized later by Imam al-Junayd. And so he says, whoever becomes a Sufi, man tasawwafa, walam yatafaqqa, and he doesn't learn fiqh alongside it, faqad tazandaq, he will go astray. He'll become like a heretic. Zindiq is a heretic. وَمَنْ تَفَقَّهَ وَلَمْ يَتَصَوَّفْ فَقَدْ تَفَسَّقْ. And if he learns fiqh without sincerity, without the sidq al-tawajjuh, then he becomes a fasiq. So he'll be in a state of disobedience. وَمَنْ جَمَعَ بَيْنَهُمَا فَقَدْ تَحَقَّقْ. And the one that brings the two together, he's the one who's realized. That's why Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, الصوفيون وفقيهم فكن ليس واحدا فإني وحقي لا إياك أنصحه. The Sufi and the faqih, don't be one of them without the other. And he said, by Allah, I'm giving you sound advice. This is in his diwan, Imam Shafi'i. He said, because the faqih without the tasawwuf, he doesn't have the spirit, and the Sufi without the fiqh, he doesn't have the protection of the, so you You need both. This is what he's saying. And then he explains, Imam Sidi Ahmed Zarruq explains, the reason the first becomes a heretic is because he'll end up saying bil jabr al-mujib. He will, because he'll have spiritual states, but he's not protected by the Sharia. He's not protected by a mental understanding. And so he'll end up saying things that are heretical. One of them is that he won't see asbab. And so he'll actually go into pure determinism without recognizing free will. And then you go into what's called the antinomial state, where antinomials were people that did not see the Sharia as binding on them, that they were free from the Sharia because they had achieved the haqiqah. And Imam Junaid was asked about them. He said, what do you say about a man who said, لَقَدْ وَصَلْتُ حَتَّى رُفِعَتْ عَنِّي الشَّرِيعَةِ, I have arrived, and so I'm no longer bound by the law. He said, نعم قد وصل إلى الجحيم. He's arrived, but he's arrived to hell. So, because he'll negate the hikmah and the ahkam. He'll end up negating the hikmah and the ahkam. And this is why Ibn Mashish, in his famous prayer, he says that he seeks refuge min awhad at-tawheed, from the dangers of tawheed. Because you can have an experience of tawheed, of pure unity, where you lose sight of sharia. And some of the ecstatic Sufis have shatahat that are famous about this. Subhani, glory to me. Ma tahta jubbati siwa Allah. Things like that. They made these utterances. That came from the danger of having this profound experience of unity without having the protection of the constructs that give it a proper understanding. And then he says, تفسق الثاني, the second one, the faqih without tasawwuf, he goes astray because لخلو عمله من التوجه الحاجب منهما, because he doesn't have in his actions the tawajjuh al-hajib, this tawajjuh that will protect him from these going astray. Like he won't have that sincerity that will protect him from the dangers that a faqih without tasawwuf has, or the Sufi without fiqh has. Those are the two dangers. And if he doesn't have the sidq al-tawajjuh, then he falls into one of those two dangers. And he says, so he falls into ma'asiyah with Allah on the one hand, and then that anything that he does it's done with the condition of ikhlas, al-mushtaraq, al-amal. He's supposed to have ikhlas. That's a condition of any action, is sincerity, that you do it with a pure intention. Inna Allaha tayyibun wa la yaqbalu illa tayyiba. Allah is pure and He only accepts purity. So if you don't have purity in your intentions, then you don't. وَتَحَقَّقَ الثَّالِث لِقِيَامِهِ بِالْحَقِيقَةِ مِنْ عَيْنَ التَّمَاسُكِ بِالْحَقِّ. So the third one has realization, تَحَقَّقَ. He has realization because he is fulfilling the reality بالحقيقة في عين التماسك بالحق, in the essence of his firmness, of his state of firmness in the truth. He's fulfilling that reality, which has an exoteric and an esoteric component. So he's solid, he's firm in his qiyam bil-haq. He has the both sides of it. So he says, so understand that.